My teacher was trying to be.
But you said, I thought you were saying, I thought you were saying it affectionately, that he was done witty.
Because, being
whatever.
Davis,
And we're going
near the front.
Yeah.
we're going to.
Not hate to
Near
have
the
the
front.
front gates, you know?
I'd love to.
Yes. My
Did the-
gosh.
If you're gonna buy tickets, you have to put your name on them.
Late, I mean, I have.
That's okay.
nails. I have my own nails. We live-
I got a pen here.
These are passing notes up there.
Tonight.
No, the one that I'm reading at home.
Yeah.
Oh, you got a new book out here. Yeah, David got.
Yeah, what's new books? That's one.
What's it say on the back of that box?
War of the Roses, Elizabeth.
So she would end up going. where did they go?
Encyclopedia.
The company that.
Yeah, probably.
Oh my God, it's from the Chicago fire, 1870. That's nice.
Boeing had another.
Oh, really?
Yeah, let me.
My son won't fly Boeings now. He said, don't fly.
Crash landed on a runway.
Uh,
I don't know. I didn't get there yet.
Would you be a 30-year-old chair?
So what's the way we do? 3 for 5,
Already are there.
and then 5 for the.
You, most of great people in the dark.
Yes.
All the problems, was like.
Yeah, you're gonna sit over there.
gang.
Sit next door. You sit. You should sit next to Steve.
How's everybody doing?
With that, we're moving down here.
So our treasurer's report. In the checking account, we have $963. Three in petty cash for a total of $1,078. Good. Can we make an announcement about this? Dollar piece, 3 for 5.
Why?
What is it?
Here.
The tickets are dollar piece, 3 for 5.
Okay, we have the knife, the souvenir knife for raffle again this time. Go ahead, tell.
It's a Robert E. Lee Bowie knife made by Franklin Mint, donated by Rick DeMarco, and we're selling tickets this month, and next month, and the drawing will be next month, and it's $1 a ticket, 3 for 5.
That's that. And of course, we have our raffle for our books up here.
He meant.
Next month, is going to be a traditional roundtable type meeting where we come, we throw out some topics, talk about them, tell us what you think, and everybody gets involved, okay? So that'll be our end of the year meeting. When I say end of the year, I mean, it's just the beginning of summer. So July and August, we don't meet, as you know. And then we'll be back in September, right? For 10 months. How about books read by anybody? Want to tell us a little bit? And okay, we got a couple. Let's get John out.
This one I just got, making the rounds, A Demon of Unrest. Excellent, excellent author. I've only begun to read it, but it's very easy to read. He goes through things. I'm looking forward to the rest of it, actually. It's excellent, excellent. Hopefully, by the next meeting, I will have finished the whole thing and more fully. You have it too?
Same book.
Yes.
I ordered it, I pre-ordered it, and when it was released May 1st, I got it in the mail. I finished it. I really enjoyed that author. I've read several of his books.
Funded in the vial, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What's the title and who's the author? The Demon of Unrest, Rick Larson.
My favorite though was from the White City. But I like how he focuses on just certain individuals and tells the entire narrative through their perspectives.
During the 3-month period after.
It begins right with the election of Lincoln and ends with the shots fired or the surrender of Fort Sumter.
It's like a 6-month period.
Anybody else read anything we should, there we go.
Take a look. In keeping with this topic, my nephew recommended this book. It's called Manhunt. You guys probably all read it, but it's a wonderful book. No doubt you're gonna make reference.
Just turned it into a mini series on Apple TV.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I've heard a real variety of opinions on that, but the book is excellent.
Yeah, the book is fantastic. I've read that as well. I think one of the better ones out there of the overall.
Yeah.
There was a move, they were trying to talk about a movie a while back with Harrison Ford, but never came to pass, obviously, I guess.
So I think this streaming thing is what they came up with. Okay, go ahead.
This is it was a set of 3 books that I wanted together. This is, the one I'm reading is the Civil War narrative, Fredericksburg to Meriden.
Okay, so
by
Shelby
Shelby
Foot.
And I've read like about 150 pages, but there's 900 some pages in the book.
For anybody that has waded through Shelby Foot trilogy, it's quite an undertaking. I understand.
And it's
You'll get there. Just keep plugging.
very good. I had finished the one that I had read on Get Expert.
I have that on audio, audiobooks of those 3.
Oh,
And it's wonderful when you're doing a real long drive.
Anybody been anywhere that we need to know about? Robert, killed it last month. I mean, he was, all over the place. And, but, nobody else? Okay, good. All right, so let's get going. I can't wait for this one. This is gonna be good, I'm sure. Greg Caggiano is gonna talk to us about the, Lincoln assassination. I assume the manhunt as well. Wherever you get to, we'll leave it to him. All right, let's give him a welcome.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me. This your phone's ringing. This is the first time I've actually spoken to a Civil War organization. Usually, doing libraries or other groups, and half the audience is really into it. The other half are spouses that have been dragged along for the ride. So to be doing this for an actual group that loves the Civil War, very special. I hope you guys will enjoy this here tonight. I did try to get here last month, but as someone that does Titanic and the Lincoln assassination, April is a particularly busy month for me. All sharing the same anniversary. Lincoln shot on the 14th, died on the 15th. The Titanic sinks the iceberg on the 14th, sinks on the 15th. So glad to be here. This is a topic that it's kind of hard to make new. Everybody here, whether you're a Civil War fanatic or not, everybody has a baseline knowledge already about Abraham Lincoln. And I think we all know a little bit about John Wilkes Booth. So for me as a historian, not just trying to educate you, but also entertain you, also trying to come up with information that you may have never heard before, trying to take maybe a little bit different approach to this topic, rather than just your basic life and presidency of Abraham Lincoln, your life and career of John Wilkes Booth. And for the Lincoln assassination, one of the more seminal moments in our history, something that still reverberates today, when you take a look through Reconstruction, how it went without Lincoln's presence through the Civil Rights era and through today in our very hotly political climate, all tracing its way back to one single shot fired on April 15th in 1865. And trying to understand this, at least for me, as a lifelong Civil War buff, the best way to understand the assassination is not even really to look at the event itself, which is really just so fleeting, only a few moments in time, but to go back and look at the whole picture, to look at the progressions of not just Abraham Lincoln as a president, as a politician, but also his assassin, John Wilkes Booth. And for somebody growing up with this interest, I always wondered about Booth, and it was a little bit different maybe 20 or 25 years ago when you didn't have necessarily the amount of internet resources we have today, and trying to figure out, well, what exactly made John Wilkes Booth tick? What drove him to do what he did? Unfortunately, Booth has such a brief appearance in our history. We've kind of written him out of our story as this irrelevant scoundrel who was craving fame and immortality and achieved this by assassinating a president. But that really just robs us of the complexity of John Wilkes Booth and of the situation. I try to liken it to today. Pick whoever you think the most famous actor in America is, whether it be Leonardo DiCaprio, whoever. And then you hear, you're sitting watching TV, newsflash, the president's been assassinated. That's your first shock. Some of you may remember Kennedy, so you may have been there before, but overall, most of the country's never been through something like that. You have this immense shock. The president has been assassinated, whether you like the person or not. And then about a half hour later, you hear that it was Leonardo DiCaprio who commit the crime. It's this 1-2 punch, this like, what? Like you wouldn't be able to wrap your minds around it. Even today in this modern world where we're so very desensitized from violence just based on what we see in the news every day. So put yourself back another 150 years to a time where presidents didn't get assassinated. And then finding out the assassin was, in fact, one of the most famous men in America, if not the most famous, tied with his brother Edwin as a Shakespearean theater actor. And growing up as a kid, I think no matter how old you are, 30, 50, 80, you probably all read those American Heritage books, right? It was hardcover. They were very beautifully illustrated for the time. They're still great resources. And as a lifelong history nerd, I too read them. And when researching this, I tried to use a variety of sources, if anything, just to understand the pop culture of the assassination and of an assassin. And in 1963, American Heritage released a 100th anniversary set on the American Civil War for the Battle of Gettysburg. And in the section on 1865, it had one single paragraph about the assassination and only 3 words to describe John Wilkes Booth, which you can see on the screen, quote, an insane assassin. And this is probably what most people grow up learning. Booth was this, he's whatever, this crazy person. We always apply that to our assassins, whoever they are, and sometimes it's justified, sometimes not. But who was John Wilkes Booth really? Was he just this crazy guy that woke up one day and said, I'm going to kill President Lincoln? No, this was a man who was actually on a path to greatness, who was making an incredible amount of money as an actor. Like I said, probably the most famous, if not up there with his own brother, Edwin. And it's kind of lazy to just slap that, oh, he was crazy, label to John Wilkes Booth, just as it is to a lot of infamous characters throughout history, because we don't want to really see that humanity. We don't want to think, well, gee, a normal person, somebody who was a celebrity could commit this horrible crime. And so for the sake of today, in showing you John Wilkes Booth, it's not an attempt to justify him. It's not an attempt to rationalize. It's just to show, well, who was he? What was his career? And also, what did he throw away? Because that's how I look at it, in trying to kind of humanize everybody. We're going to humanize Lincoln later. We're also now trying to humanize John Wilkes Booth. 26 years old at the time of the assassination, making an incredible amount of money, all thrown away because of a moment of irrational anger. Booth himself was born in 1838. His father was an actor, Junius Brutus, ironic in the name Brutus, and it's a character that Booth himself will be playing on stage in the play Julius Caesar. His brother Edwin and Junius Brutus Jr., they were also relatively famous actors as well. There's actually 6 people in the family who are actors. And while Edwin is probably the most famous, at least when John Wilkes begins his career, he's also the most traditional. And John Wilkes Booth kind of arrives on scene as someone that people immediately loved. And when I say people, I mean audiences, the crowds. A lot of the critics looked at John Wilkes versus Edwin, and they fawned over Edwin as the traditional interpreter of Shakespeare and of tragedy. And John Wilkes Booth came along and kind of dashed on stage as this incredibly handsome person with the jet black hair, the mustache, an early sex symbol or matinee idol, if you will. Somebody that was known for his memory, his ability to recite the lines, but also trying to put different spins on his interpretations of Shakespeare, including adding more gore and more violence and blood to his performances on stage. Because when you study Shakespeare, I mean, that's all it is. It's just one killing after another. There would be blood flowing everywhere. And so the traditional performances, you'd stick somebody with a sword, they'd put it between their arm in their chest and fall over. Booth wanted people to actually see blood. And you can imagine audiences, for the most part, loved it. Young people loved it. But the critics looked at this and went, that's disgusting. This is no place on stage. If only they knew what would be in movies and TV 150 years later. Booth is the second most photographed man in America, number one being Abraham Lincoln. Good. And his family, it's kind of like a microcosm of the Civil War as a whole. We've all heard brother versus brother, literally on battlefields, in some cases, family members being on the same field as one another. And the Booth family is no different, not facing each other off in battle, but people that are split. Edwin Booth, staunch Northern Union supporter, refuses to act down south during the war. And John Wilkes being somebody who is very much a Confederate sympathizer, who will act both north and south because he sees the immense financial opportunity. They are driven to competition by their father, Junius Brutus Sr., who is, by all accounts, not exactly the nicest person in the world, who knew how to kind of manipulate his sons to get what he thought would be a good performance out of them, or to get them to be as good as they could be, but also kind of stoking some hatred between the two. You know, John Wilkes seeing Edwin's performance and Junius Brutus saying, you know, you could do it better than that, making sure the other one would hear it, so that they get a little annoyed at each other and they would compete and try to become better. John Wilkes Booth, a lot of historians and people, especially today in this political climate where any Civil War discussion at all is quickly turned into something that it probably shouldn't be, have long tried to say that Booth was a nobody. He was irrelevant. He was never going to be as famous as his brother. He achieved this immortality, this fame, by assassinating President Lincoln. But these following quotes and information are going to show that's actually not the case. And in Booth's own words, he says, "My goose does indeed hang high. Long may she wave. I have picked up an average this season $650 per week. My first week here paid me $900, and this week has opened even better." Somebody making $900 in the 1860s, I mean, that's a decent amount of money even today. So put yourself back 150 years. As for whether or not he wants to join the army, Booth says, "I have only an army to give. My brains are worth 20 men, my money worth 100. I have free pass everywhere. My profession, my name is my passport. My beloved precious money, oh never beloved until now, is the means, one of the means, by which I will serve the South." This is someone that he's kind of torn. Should he stay in theater, keep acting? Does he maybe join the army, become a soldier? And he manages to convince himself, along with his fellow actors who do not want to see him leave, that it is still important to, one, be an actor, because people do need a distraction in times of war and times of strife, just like today, with so many horrible things going on in the world. We want to go see a movie or go see a play. But also he realizes, because he is going to act both north and south, he is going to be able to meet people. He is going to be able to hear things. Not calling him a spy, but, you know, when you're giving a performance and next thing you know, when it's over, there's Union generals in attendance or maybe politicians in attendance, and you're world-famous actor John Wilkes Booth, people tend to talk, especially when they're in the company of a celebrity. And so he manages to keep his ears open. Maybe somebody will mention something about a troop movement or about something going on in politics, and he knows he can relay this information to the right people. As he says, he has free pass everywhere, which is not the case with your typical Confederate sympathizer. As I said, Booth's interpretations are going to draw praise and criticism. The young people generally love it. The traditionalists do not like him. The critics tend to be traditionalists and therefore do not like him. And we see some reviews here. 1863, Washington Sunday Chronicle, "We do not regard Mr. Booth as an eminent tragedian. Unless he has improved very much since we last saw him, he is little more than a second-rate actor who, as the possessor of a great name and with a fine presence, sweet voice, and much natural ability, has seen proper to come upon the stage as a representative of a tragedy. It is possible that in time Booth will become a great actor." From the Washington Daily Chronicle, "He certainly deserves the merit of giving us the worst Richard now upon the stage. In plainer words, his Richard is as bad as it is possible for an actor to make him. It is possible that there might have been such a Richard as Shakespeare drew, but such a creation as that of Mr. Booth never existed. He does not seem to be satisfied with the text before him. That is bad enough. But this doesn't really affect Booth's popularity, and it certainly doesn't affect the amount of money he is making. And just think today, we're not so very different from where we were 150 years ago. How many movies have come out and the critics rip them to shreds, yet they still make $200 million? People, us, regular, normal moviegoers, maybe we love the film, but the critics don't. And so it's kind of the same dynamic here. There is a little bit of foreshadowing in this review from 1863. When Booth comes upon the stage, he looks like a rascal. He scowls in certain parts. He rubs his hands in a coarse, fiendish manner, as though there was as much brutality in his nature as one of his own murderers. He insists on being mentioned in the same sentence as Forrest, Macready, Davenport, Wallach, and Edwin Booth. This is an attempt to gain fame under false pretenses. This is a quote that many, I think, would agree with over the years. And it's it's a little bit of foreshadowing, and also kind of amazing that somebody in 1863 had the psychological know-how to watch just what was a performance on stage and recognize something in John Wilkes Booth. He had this fire, this anger, this violent nature, if you will, that although he's playing a murderer and he's supposed to be delivering that performance on stage, there's just something about him that stands out from the rest. And this was something that was unsettling to a lot of people, because it seemed he truly was that murderer that he was trying to portray on stage. We do have a positive review. In his personification of the romantic young sculptor, Mr. Booth concentrates many of his finest qualities as an artist. The part is exceedingly picturesque and engaging, but Mr. Booth, by his earnestness, his vigorous grasp of genius, and his fervor of style, invests it with an interest beyond the author's ideal, and claims in the result the most brilliant honors of its art. And it is not to be wondered at that has achieved in its embodiment its richest distinction. John T. Ford, who owned Ford's Theater in 1881, he knew John Wilkes Booth very well, as Booth knew Ford and the theater in which he would assassinate Lincoln in very well. And in 1881, Ford was asked about Booth, and he kind of took a look back. And he says, doubtless he would have become the greatest actor of his time had he lived. Besides being the handsomest man I ever saw, he was an athlete. He put into all his impersonations the vitality of perfect manhood. When he was playing in Boston, he doubtless made the greatest success of any actor of his day. People waited in crowds after performances to catch a glimpse of him as he left the theater. I had paid him $700 a week, and he could have easily earned $20,000 a year, and he was only 26 years old when he died. Booth had that magnitude that kind of gets lost with the assassination, because he is perhaps the greatest villain in American history, somebody who cut down who is perhaps the most beloved president in our history. And the magnitude of him committing this crime as the person he was gets lost in that. This was somebody that when he left the theater, there would be crowds, hundreds of people, mainly women, wanting to catch a glimpse, maybe try for a lock of his hair, maybe get an autograph. Men wanted to be him. Women wanted to be with him, as they say. And somebody that had all this going for him at the moment he commits the assassination. Booth does kind of regret not joining the Confederate Army. He has some moments as the war goes on where he's wondering, like, should I really be acting on stage? Should I maybe join the Army? He's looking at the plays, he's looking at the little murders and the fake weapons, and he's saying that he's starting to regret it. He says, what are actors anyway? Mummers of the quality of skimmed milk, they know little, think less, and understand next to nothing. Of course, his fellow actors convince him to stay, and telling him that we need art, as we certainly do. His views on slavery, he is a staunch supporter of slavery, but he does not own slaves himself. He is someone that manages to really lose himself in anger, mainly stemming from Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. A man who, as Lee surrendered, as the war appeared to be winding down, completely saw his world falling apart, but ironically is somebody that his way of life probably would not have changed very much simply because he did not own slaves himself. He doesn't necessarily hate the Union. It's a specific hatred towards Lincoln. He doesn't like the northern states, of course, but the hatred, the fire burning inside of him is specifically aimed at one person, which is President Lincoln, calling him a tyrant, and also against the abolitionists, which have whipped people into a frenzy and eventually caused the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1861, Booth takes a different approach than most people when describing the upcoming war. As you know, anybody here that's really into the war, how many people felt the war was going to be maybe just one big battle, was only going to last a little bit. Both sides would fight one battle and then they'd say, oh, we don't want this war. And then they'd come to some kind of compromise. And most people felt that was the case. But Booth, like few others, says you now all feel the fire raging in the nation's heart. It is a fire lighted and fanned by northern fanaticism, a fire which not by blood and justice can extinguish. I tell you, the abolitionist doctrine is the fire which, if allowed to rage, will consume the house and crush all beneath its ruins. Fierce civil war will follow, and then what then? Why, God alone can tell the rest. Ironically, him and Abraham Lincoln both using a house metaphor to describe the coming war. Lincoln, of course, saying a house divided against itself cannot stand. In 1862, John Wilkes Booth is actually arrested in St. Louis for, quote, treasonous remarks when he said publicly, I wish the president and the whole damn government would go to hell. You get arrested for saying something like that back then. Imagine if they had Twitter back then, what they might have thought. But as is the case with most petty crimes of that nature, you'd have to pay a small fine, maybe like $10, and swear an allegiance to the United States, and out you go. Him and his brother Edwin continue to argue. They cannot come to any kind of familial compromise. Edwin trying to convince him you should not be acting in the Confederate States. John Wilkes saying, well, you're the one missing out because I'm making a killing. I'm acting in Boston, New York, Washington, Savannah, everywhere. 1864, Booth is involved in a plot to kidnap Abraham Lincoln, thinking that with the war now heading in the Union's favor after being on a Confederate projection for the first 3 years, capturing Lincoln and ransoming him either for an end of the war or to release all of the Confederate prisoners of war and thus keep the war effort going. That plot will fall through, and some of those same conspirators would be involved in the assassination, which we will talk about later. There's going to be 3 moments where art intersects with history. And are these 3 moments important? Not really. I just find them interesting. And they always say art mimics life or life mimics art, however. There's going to be a couple times where what Booth is doing on stage mirrors or foreshadows events that are happening in real life. And we have to, again, consider most of Booth's performances are Shakespeare, not exclusively, but mostly. Many of those plays are tragedies or regicides, which involves the killing of a king or tyrannical figure. And this is somebody who is now developing an intense hatred for somebody who he considers to be a tyrant or a king, but not in the positive sense. This first moment is going to occur September 17th, 1862, the very night that the Battle of Antietam was fought, which was the single bloodiest day in American history, between killed and wounded. I can't think of the number offhand. Anybody have the number? 10,000 plus, I believe, casualties. 23,000 casualties. And on the very night, which they didn't know what the casualties were, it took hours or days for such information to be telegrammed. Booth is on stage playing Hamlet in Chicago. And in one of his soliloquies, the end of it says, the imminent death of 20,000 men, go to their graves like beds, fight for a plot. Oh, from this time forth, my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth. This matches up with what is going on in Antietam, but also something a little bit more important other than just a simple coincidence. This is literally the moment, Antietam and its aftermath, which includes the Emancipation Proclamation. This is what turns Booth from an angry actor, someone who just hates Lincoln, to somebody who might do something about it. There is a book that came out several years ago about Booth. It is called My Thoughts Be Bloody. And it basically says this is where it began, because following Union, technically, victory at Antietam, it was mainly a stalemate, but they were given credit for victory. Lincoln releases the Emancipation Proclamation, which would go into effect January of the next year. That is what sets Booth off. Booth hates Lincoln. He's not a fan of the North, but he's looking at the institution of slavery, something so intrinsic to what he felt was American way of life, or at least Southern American way of life. And that is what is going to drive him to want to get involved in a kidnapping plot and eventually a murder plot. It's going to start with the Battle of Antietam, and his thoughts are literally going to become bloody, just as he is saying it upon the stage. In the spring of 1863, Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln are attending Macbeth. And who is on stage playing Macbeth? It's going to be John Wilkes Booth. And the president and Mary Todd are up there in their box, and Booth is doing his thing. And there is a specific soliloquy called the Dagger of the Mind soliloquy, where the Macbeth himself is going to pull out a dagger, and he's trying to figure out if he's hallucinating. Is the dagger real, or is it a dagger of the mind? So on and so forth. And there's a moment while holding this dagger, talking about a threat, that he looks up in the box and he sees President and Mrs. Lincoln. And when Booth delivers this soliloquy, he locks eyes with Lincoln while holding this dagger. Now, President and Mary Todd thought it was the most exhilarating thing they had ever seen. Mary Todd in particular, held breathless by this performance. And as you know, if you've been to Broadway, sometimes an actor will pick a random face in the crowd to deliver their lines to, adding to the realism of it. And so Booth has this moment. He's waving the dagger at Lincoln, but it's all part of a performance. Now, following the play, while Booth was in his dressing room, a stagehand had come running down very excitedly and says, "Mr. Booth, the president and Mrs. Lincoln want to see you," thinking this was, amazing. Who wouldn't want to meet the president? And Booth lets out a string of profanities and remarks. The stagehand was like, "Well, what do you want me to say?" And Booth's like, calms himself down and says, "You know what? Just tell him I've already left for the night." You could imagine the many what-if scenarios in history. What if they had met? I don't think Booth would have physically, went after him or anything, but what if they just happened to meet each other? What if maybe Lincoln made a joke or something and Booth maybe saw him as a person and took his hatred down like a little notch? Those are the things that drive me crazy trying to think. As many what if scenarios, Gettysburg's what if scenario, so on and so forth. If only they would have met, if even for just a couple of minutes, maybe we'd have a different result, or maybe not. Lastly, Booth's most well-known assassin figure, playing Julius Caesar. He is Brutus, which is his father's name, and he will stick the final sword thrust into Caesar as Cassius yells, "Liberty, freedom, tyranny is dead." And of course, we all know what Booth said following his killing of Abraham Lincoln, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is thus or death to tyrants. Now, this begs the question that can't really be answered, but maybe is fun to think about. Could Booth have been inspired by his own performances? It's a question that comes up very frequently when there's a mass shooting or some violent incident in the news. Kids playing violent video games, watching violent movies. Could that be inspiring people to commit acts of violence? And the reality of the situation is millions of people play violent video games, watch violent movies, just as so many actors like Booth have played murderous characters and don't go out there and do horrible things. But there's always that fraction, that tiny percentage of people who might be a little unhinged, who might be susceptible to fantasy, that may be playing these roles over and over again. Did it inspire him? Did it maybe add a little bit of dramatic flair, such as killing somebody and announcing to the world, "Sic semper tyrannis, you're the assassin," rather than trying to run out of the theater as fast as you possibly could? It's a question we can't really answer, but again, one of those things to consider. And now to Abraham Lincoln, the man of the hour. We'll get back to Booth in a little bit. And I have subtitled this section, "Savior or Tyrant," because there are some people that still view, I mean, mainly people in some areas of the South, not generalizing the South, that may view Lincoln as a tyrant or some of his decisions as a bit tyrannical. And we're going to look at some Lincoln quotes today that don't really make it into the textbook. Whether you're middle school teacher, I taught middle school for a few years, always loved when we got to the Civil War. There was a private school, so I was like, yeah, I'm taking a month for this. Or whether you're in college, some quotes that you're going to see in a few minutes that, they might be a little uncomfortable. Now, the reason why I include them is not to tarnish Lincoln. It's not to be like, gotcha. You thought you knew Abraham Lincoln. It's just to show the complete picture. It's also to show a bit of evolution as somebody who maybe felt a certain way at one point in his life and then ended up changing. I think every single person in this room, as most, we probably have different views on some political issues or moral issues than we did 10 years ago or 50 years ago. And what does that make us? Just makes us human. And Lincoln is somebody that he's been on that pedestal for so long. We do forget he was, in fact, a living, breathing person, just like all of us. And so for me, that makes it a little bit more interesting in trying to show a complete figure and also trying to show how somebody can evolve from saying things that we may find uncomfortable, certainly that were things said by men of the time, to somebody that would eventually free the slaves. Lincoln is probably the most portrayed president in movie history. I think there's over 50 or 60 portrayals. We just love him. And that's why I think these quotes that I'm going to show you in a few minutes don't make it into those textbooks, because we don't want to challenge our thoughts of Lincoln. We're afraid perhaps that maybe we won't love him as much. But again, there's nothing to really worry about because he's just a person. Question for you to contemplate personally: what is more important to you? Is it the journey or the destination? Is it the end or the means? What is more important when you're trying to accomplish something? Case in point, saving the Union and eventually freeing the slaves. Two incredible moments in our history. One politically, one morally. Does it matter how you got there if the end game was accomplished? Or does the journey you take, the decisions you make, maybe bribing somebody to vote a certain way, does that really matter if the end result is something that is really so important and so positive? Lincoln himself, he's complicated. He is probably the most complicated president. People ask me, or it eventually comes up, well, Lincoln must be your favorite president. You do these lectures on him and Civil War lectures, and he's not my favorite president, but he's my favorite person that was president, if it's possible to differentiate the two. The man, the husband, the father, thrown into this chaotic situation that nobody could probably ever envision would ever happen. How would anybody handle such stress? And Lincoln's complexities are going to keep coming up as we study his political career. His desire to say a certain thing to somebody and then say something different to someone else. A person who tries to make everybody happy in some situations, and in turn that backfires. Lincoln, born 1809, he is a prairie lawyer. He is somebody that probably never should have become president, somebody that, looking at him, you would never in a million years think somebody born in his situation in life, his condition, would have eventually become president of the United States. He's a very awkward looking man. If you've seen the movie Fargo, where they say, oh, kind of funny looking, Lincoln was kind of funny looking. 6'4", which for this time period, he might as well have been 8 feet tall. Very large, very lanky, incredibly skinny, but had this very strong shoulders. And his voice caught people off guard. He had this high-pitched, backwoodsy country twang. He sounded like a hick. He didn't sound very bright when he opened up his mouth. And people kind of took a step back when listening to that, thinking that voice is coming out of a man that large. But after a few minutes of listening to it, they did describe it as soothing, that he did actually have a nice voice. It just needed some warming up. Behind every powerful person, there's usually somebody that's driving them forward. And for him, that would be Mary Todd Lincoln. somebody who, the way she was born, yes, you would think that she would eventually become somebody married to a president, but who she ends up getting married to, two people that are so incredibly different, him being tall, her being short, him being coming from nothing, very poor, her being born into wealthy, high society. She is going to help him and coach him. When he has to go to state dinners, he was born in a cabin, right? Very little education. He didn't care if his socks matched. He didn't care if there was holes in his pants or in his jacket. And he's with somebody who grew up with a staff of people, including some slaves, somebody that ate very well and knew exactly how to behave when going to, say, a gala or a state dinner, sitting next to him, telling him simple things such as, what fork you use with what course. Lincoln had a very bawdy sense of humor. She needed to remind him, okay, when you meet the governor, now is not the time to tell those poop jokes that you love telling, which is something Lincoln loved. And we're going to get to his sense of humor in a little bit. I don't know if he would have become president without Mary Todd's gentle nudging along the way. He does have a desire to be a lawyer. He has a desire to be a politician. But Mary Todd has a desire to end up in the White House. And the two of them combined for quite an amazing team. And eventually, Mary Todd would get what she wanted and would become First Lady. We see here his progression, young, honest Abe. A lot different than how he looks towards the end of the war. We'll do a photo comparison in a little bit. He is Honest Abe. He's a person that people liked because he was not your typical politician. Remember I said you took one look at him and you go, my God, this guy could never be president. But people like that. Just like today, some people just look like your typical politician and others are more of an outsider. And those two images are appealing to people for a variety of reasons. Lincoln had that grasp to be very real with people. He was not so lofty. He was a person of the people. And a lot of that had to do with his sense of humor. When he spoke to you, it was like a normal person talking to you. The election of 1860 almost gives us the map of the Union and Confederacy. New Jersey, 3 of our electoral votes going to Southerner Stephen Douglas. And I do a lecture on New Jersey and slavery. And it's just important to note that New Jersey was the last Union state to free its slaves. And due to gradual emancipation, there were actually still some people enslaved or working through indentured servitude in this country at the start of the American Civil War. We have a lot of farms. We are the Garden State. Slavery was a thriving industry here until mainly the 1840s, but it did persist. And so there were a lot of people in New Jersey that did not necessarily like Abraham Lincoln. So 3 of our electoral votes go to Stephen Douglas. Breckinridge is the main challenger. Lincoln wins the election, and of course, the rest is history. We have Fort Sumter, which I'm not going to dwell on. And next thing you know, we have the not-so-United States of America. Lincoln is going to make some decisions. As all this is going on, as states are trying to decide, are they going to secede or are they going to stay? Lincoln makes 2 decisions that some perceive as tyrannical. If you ask a lot of Southerners, like, what would you think this would be like if I was doing this talk right now in Missouri? I wouldn't be doing this talk in Missouri. And I'm not trying to generalize the South at all. I'm just saying that there are still some areas, there are some people that still have not let go yet. And to give you a more modern example, we have hockey fans here. I know because we were just talking. I don't know if you remember, it's about 10 or 15 years ago, the Rangers were in Carolina, as they are now. And it was just a normal regular season game. And, they do a pan of the crowd. People are holding up signs and cheering. It was like during pregame warmups, and there was this lady in a Hurricanes jersey, and she held up this big sign that said, "Still hate Lincoln." And it was just like a quick, few seconds. And I'm thinking, well, there's no one named Lincoln on the Rangers. Like, who is she talking about? And then I'm like, wait a second. She's talking about Abraham Lincoln. She took a sign to a hockey game in 2015 or whatever it was, and just wanted the world to know we still don't like Abraham Lincoln. Now, she is just one person, obviously, but the thought still does persist among certain people. So if you ask down south, they've gone through their whole thing with calling it the War of Northern Aggression, not recognizing certain holidays. or changing certain holidays to be holidays of Confederate generals. And, you know, I have a lot of my favorite generals are Confederate generals. I mean, I have favorites on both sides. But to take a step back from that, there are people that feel, number one, his decision to raise an army following the attack on Fort Sumter is tyrannical. Personally, I don't agree with that because, well, what was he supposed to do? But a lot of people likened it to Caesar marching on Rome and calling for an army to invade your own country. So you can see it a little bit, but overall, really, what was the guy supposed to do following such an attack? Now, the second decision, one that may merit some debate or some thought, is his suspension of habeas corpus in 1861, when Maryland was voting to decide whether or not they were going to stay in the Union. Habeas corpus is your right to be detained without trial. He suspends this, and any politician who he feels is going to vote for secession, he places under house arrest during the vote. The vote is taken, Maryland stays in the Union, and he lets them all go. So, back to that question I asked earlier. Is it a bit tyrannical? Yes or no? Doesn't really matter. But the second question, the big question is, was it just the means to an end? Maryland had to stay in the Union because of Washington, D.C.'s proximity. You could imagine the capital of the Union all of a sudden being in a Confederate territory. Is this the master politician at work doing what he had to do to get an end game result? Or is Abraham Lincoln a tyrant? And I think that second decision, you can kind of maybe see both sides to that. But here we are with a saved Union and an eventual freeing of the slaves. So is it the end or the means? Lincoln addresses, there's a lot of apprehension in the South. That's a kind word, apprehension in the South. Southern politicians have spent a lot of time whipping their people up into a frenzy that Abraham Lincoln is going to come and he's going to destroy your way of life along with all of his Yankee counterparts. They're going to come for your slaves. Oh, you don't own slaves? Well, next they're going to come for your guns. They're going to come for your land. You know, the same tired trope over and over again and trying to get people on your side to be angry, even if they do not have a horse in the race. And so Lincoln addresses this in his first inaugural address. And he says, there has never been any reasonable cause for such apprehension. And then I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. Lincoln is going to kind of flip-flop, politically anyway, on the issue of slavery. He is the master politician. He wants to tell whatever audience is in front of him what they want to hear, or whenever it's convenient to hear a certain thought, that's what he wants to give them. Now, morally, he's against slavery for most of his life, but politically is a different story. His issues, they're divided. And originally, he's opposed to slavery and abolition. And he says the institution of slavery is founded on both injustice and bad policy, but the promulgation of abolition doctrines tends to increase rather than abate its evils. And people today have a hard time understanding, well, how can you be against slavery and also against freeing the slaves at the same time? It's an issue that had divided even abolitionists, because there is the issue of, well, once the slaves are freed, what do we do with them? There are a lot of people in the North who think slavery is absolutely appalling, but at the same time don't want to lose jobs to newly freed slaves, don't want those newly freed slaves living next door to them once they are free. This is an opinion that is pretty common for the time period. When he runs for president, he is still not publicly against slavery or wanting to terminate it, but he is against its expansion, wanting to not see it spread to new states, but it can stay in the states that it already exists. In his early years, he said, in 1841, you and I together had a tedious low-water trip on a steamboat from Louisville down to St. Louis. You may remember as well as I do that from Louisville to the mouth of the Ohio, there were on board 10 or a dozen slaves shackled together with irons. That sight was a continual torment to me, and I see something like it every time I touch the Ohio or any other slave border. In 1858, though, a little bit harsher of a quote here, debating in Charleston, Illinois. And he says, I am not nor ever have been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. There is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior, and I, as much as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. But yet 1 year later, he says, I think slavery is wrong morally and politically. I desire that it should be no further spread in these United States, and I should not object if it should gradually terminate in the whole Union. We can see here how mixed signals develop back and forth between just 1 year saying, I believe in white supremacy and they'll never be equal, and we should, once they're free, find some place for them. And then just like that, slavery is horrible and I don't want it to exist anymore. He does this. It's infuriating. It's infuriating to everybody. People that are against slavery are mad because he's not taking a firm enough stance. People that are for slavery are mad at him because he's talking about, eventually it's going to come to an end. Abolitionists are mad because they think he's on their side, but then he's saying stuff like this. So he's trying to make everybody happy based on his audience. And as we know, when you try to make everybody happy, that usually backfires. In the 1850s, a movement called Back to Africa was started by American abolitionists, both white and of color, trying to figure out the solution to once the slaves are free. There are now going to be millions of more people that are going to need homes, that are going to need jobs, that are going to be part of society. What do we do with such an influx? And there were a great many people that felt the best thing to do was to send them back to Africa and give them their own country. And Liberia was one of these countries that was decided on the West Coast. And in fact, if you look at the first, I think it's 7 or 8 presidents of Liberia, they all have English-sounding names. And they felt that, they will never coexist here. There aren't enough jobs. There's this, there's that. We will send them back to where they came from. And Lincoln was originally a supporter of this, saying, and you can see the time period here would have been the Kansas-Nebraska situation, a separation of the races is the only perfect preventative of amalgamation, but as an immediate separation is impossible, the next best thing is to keep them apart where they are not already together. If white and black people never get together in Kansas, they will never mix blood in Kansas. That is at least one self-evident truth. It is not against our interest to transfer the African to his native clime, and we shall find a way to do it, however great the task may be. This is a movement that is quite popular early on, but very quickly fizzles out as more slaves become free. They become more educated. They join the abolitionist movement themselves, and they go, well, wait a second. I've never been to Africa. It was my grandfather that was brought here by slave traders. And there were a lot of freed slaves and black Americans who did not see a place for themselves in another continent, but to remain here and build a life in this country, which, despite being enslaved, was the only country they knew. As for Lincoln's main views, his overwhelming views to the beginning of the Civil War and trying to keep the country together, saying here, if I could save the Union without freeing a slave, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do that also. It's very lukewarm. It's very wishy-washy. It's very, we'll free some, we'll keep some, maybe we'll free them all, maybe not. And when you say words like this, it's very easy for politicians to maybe twist those words and say, well, look here, he said he wants to free the slaves, when in reality, he's only talking about saving the Union. As for why we ignore such quotes, why they don't make their way into books and various projects, Eric Foner, who writes in a highly recommended book, The Fiery Trial. The problem is that we tend too often to read Lincoln's growth backward as an unproblematic trajectory towards a predetermined end. This enables scholars to ignore or downplay aspects of Lincoln's beliefs with which they are uncomfortable. And it is uncomfortable reading quotes about white supremacy and they'll never be equal and what do we do? But it is part of someone's growth. It is part of Lincoln's growth as his evolution as a politician and as a president. And for most people, we look at the accomplishments of him and we go, well, none of this stuff really matters. And maybe it doesn't matter because of what he accomplished. But for me to try to paint that complete picture, to try to just show people, hey, he was a person, he was flawed just like all of us, and he ended up accomplishing saving the Union and also freeing the slaves. And these are contributing factors, these quotes, because of how they can be misconstrued, angering people in the North. There was a Copperhead movement up here, which was an anti-Lincoln movement we're going to talk about a little bit today. Everybody is finding something in Lincoln to dislike, and it's kind of amazing he won the presidency at all. Southern politicians and propagandists, they're easily able to take those words, twist them around, and so he is going to face opposition everywhere he goes. Now, let's take a quick break from all that depressing stuff and talk about Lincoln's sense of humor.
I know.
Lincoln loved to tell a joke. He was very serious. He was very depressed. I mean, he had clinical depression, you would say, in modern terms. Actually, William Herndon, friend and biographer, said that these jokes were an antidote to such depression. And oftentimes, Lincoln would hear something and it would maybe spark a joke or a story, and he would say, this reminds me of a story, to which people in the room would probably groan, thinking, oh God, here comes another joke, here comes another story. Lincoln loved profanity. He loved scatological references. He's also very self-deprecating, famously saying, when accused of being two-faced, if I had two faces, why would I wear this one? Now, his storytelling kind of became a habit. He probably thought it was a hobby, learning new jokes and stories, but for him, it was like instant. As soon as somebody would say something, bam, he would react with a story. Now, I have Lincoln's favorite joke. Would you like to hear it?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, of course you would. It does have a curse word in it, but who cares? So this was Lincoln's favorite joke that he liked to tell. Some of you maybe have heard it already. So Ethan Allen went to Great Britain following the American Revolution, and he was having dinner with former British soldiers who were now friends, or they were friends before the Revolution, and they were enemies, and now they are friends. And so they were having dinner in Great Britain, and these British soldiers thought that they would play a little prank on Ethan Allen. And so what they did was they took a portrait of George Washington and they placed it above the toilet in the outhouse, or the hole in the board, knowing that eventually Ethan Allen's going to have to go to the bathroom. So they're having dinner. Ethan Allen has to go. He gets up, he excuses himself, he goes to the bathroom, he comes back, doesn't say a word. And they're kind of mad because they were hoping he'd come back in a rage, screaming, how dare you? But instead, Ethan Allen just calmly sits back down and continues eating dinner. And finally, their curiosity just gets the better of them. And one of them says to Ethan Allen, did you went to the bathroom, right? And he says, yeah. He says, well, you went in the outhouse, you used the toilet? He says, yeah. He says, well, didn't you see what was above the toilet? And Allen says, yeah. And they say, well, doesn't that make you mad that we put a picture of your first president, somebody so loved and respected, above the toilet? That doesn't make you angry? And Ethan responds, well, no, it actually makes perfect sense, because what better way to get an Englishman to shit than the sight of George Washington? I have one more. Lincoln loved to tell this story as well. This is a lot shorter. So Lincoln was riding in the woods one day on horseback, and there was a narrow path. And he saw a woman on horseback riding towards him. And so he pulled his horse over to the side to let her pass. And she stopped and looked him dead in the eye and said, you, sir, are the ugliest man I have ever seen in my life. And Lincoln responds, well, ma'am, I can't help that. And she says, no, but you could have stayed home. Now, my favorite Lincoln joke, I actually can't tell because it literally takes 15 minutes to read, and it all builds up to a punchline about a fart. You can get them online. You look up the jokes of Abraham Lincoln on Google. There used to be a website that had like page after page of them. So anyway, he's telling jokes. You could imagine Mary Todd, high society Mary Todd, sitting there at a dinner while he's telling jokes like that. She was probably horrified as hell. Anyway, back to the depressing nature at hand here. Let's get to the Emancipation Proclamation. Back to Civil War. So, probably most misunderstood document in history. Kim, as a Civil War person and history teacher, this is the document that freed the slaves, right? That's what the textbooks say. And this is something that doesn't matter. Middle school, elementary school, college, high school, because they don't want to get complex. They don't want to look at gray areas. They just want to make it nice and easy. This is what freed the slaves. And let's move on to the Battle of Gettysburg, which is usually how it goes in the curriculum. In reality, while this is an important step towards their eventual freeing, it actually doesn't really free anybody. This is only going to apply to states in rebellion. So you could argue the same states that Lincoln has no jurisdiction over because they are in a rebellious state against the Union. Now, he has to do this, again, master politician at work. The abolitionists need something, and they have been pressuring him for an emancipation. And Lincoln is looking at the state of the Union Army. He's looking at them losing one battle after another, firing one commander-in-chief after the other, and he would say, well, how embarrassing, how bad would we look if we tried something like this in this state of disarray? So finally, Battle of Antietam is fought. It was a stalemate, but the Union Army held the field at the end of the day. They took that as their victory, and Lincoln would announce just days later an Emancipation Proclamation, which would go into effect January 1st, 1863. The reason why this is not all slaves in the country is because of the 4 border states, which are kind of annoying to the people that want to ignore what the Emancipation Proclamation really is, the people that want to gloss over it and just move right along. I actually wrote them down because I always forget them. Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri. These are 4 Union states that still have slavery. And so if Lincoln is going to free all the slaves, those 4 border states might turn and join the Confederacy. So for political reasons only, this is to be so. The border states, the Union states that have slaves can keep them, but we're going to free them in every other state. The intent, I think, was for word to get around to slaves on the plantations. I don't know if, not many plantation owners are going to be walking around saying, hey, there's an Emancipation Proclamation, but word does get around. And I think the goal was probably to get slaves to walk off the plantations and make their way north. How many, the number of these, we don't really know. But this is the elephant that's been in the room for this entire war. And not even, actually, for decades beforehand, trying to figure out the slavery issue. And while this doesn't really free any slaves, it is at least a step in that direction. The war aims of the Union Army. It's important to note, and this is where, when you got a history teacher that's really into it and says, okay, class, we're not using the book for the next month, trying to say, well, the Civil War was only to free the slaves. Well, originally, according to the Crittenden-Johnson Compromise of 1861, the war aims of the Union Army are defined as solely the reunification of the United States, not abolition. Slavery isn't even mentioned, and this is so because they want to get as many people to join the Army as possible. You have a lot of people in the North that are patriotic, that want to see the country stay together. They're willing to join the Army to fight for that cause. You want to make this a war about freeing slaves? They might not want to join. You got somebody maybe in upstate New York or Vermont. They may think slavery is wrong, but they might not want to join an army and risk their life in order to end it. So very clearly, these are the war aims of the Army in 1861. This is going to change in about 1863. During the first 3 years of the war, we had something called the Copperhead Movement, which was widespread in New York and New Jersey and all over the northern states. These were people that were anti-Lincoln Northerners who opposed Lincoln and in some cases supported slavery to exist in the states where it already was. These were mainly made of Democrats who were conservatives of the time, and this would switch. The Democrats were conservatives. The Republicans were seen as the liberals of the day. And the movement was to get a quick end to the war by any means necessary, whether it would be a truce with the Confederacy where the sides would get together and figure out a way for them to have their own country, or just flat out Confederate victory. And this is strongest in late 1862 into 1863. Again, the Union Army is in disaster mode. 7 commander-in-chiefs, then they lose the Battle of Chancellorsville. Heading into the Battle of Gettysburg, it seemed that the Confederacy was going to win this war, which despite the North and its unending amount of men and supplies and factories was losing. And so there was a lot of hatred and disdain for Abraham Lincoln fighting this war, seeing so many people getting killed and wounded, and we're going to end up losing. Like, just give the Confederacy their own country. But the tide is going to turn. One of those amazing moments in history, how a war was going one way for 3 years, and in a matter of 48 hours, it does a complete 360. Confederate Army, they're on the brink of winning this war. May of 1863, they're at their high point. They feel if they can win a battle on northern soil, they might be able to force the North to its knees. They invade, end up in Gettysburg. They lose the Battle of Gettysburg, of course, on July 3rd. And the very next day, Vicksburg, key port city in Mississippi, will fall. And in a matter of 48 hours, we went from it's only a matter of time before the Confederates win the war to it's only a matter of time before the Union wins, because of the amount of men that were either killed at Gettysburg or captured at Vicksburg from the Confederate Army would not be able to be replaced. Anytime a Confederate soldier died, that was it. Union soldier died, well, they'd just get 10 or 20 more to replace them, probably 100 more to replace them. Ulysses S. Grant is in charge of the Union Army. Meade, of course, has the title of commander-in-chief, but Grant is in charge. And Lincoln went from having to deal with stuff like this to that public opinion is starting to shift. He's starting to enjoy a little bit more popularity. Keyword, little bit. Gettysburg Address is going to change the course of the war effort and also this nation's history. And this happens in November because it took that long after July for them to clean up the town, to bury the dead, to locate the bodies. And I think we probably all know the story, the cemetery dedication, and Lincoln is not even the featured speaker. That was given to orator Edward Everett. He is the main event. He is to get up and deliver the keynote address, and then the president would come up and make, quote, a few appropriate remarks. Contrary to popular belief, Lincoln was not writing the speech on the back of a cocktail napkin in the train on the way over, but it was a very short speech, and Lincoln didn't think highly of it. He speaks for 2.5 minutes. Edward Everett spoke for 2.5 hours. He delivered a speech that was 13,000 words. How many of you know Edward Everett's speech? Yeah, that's what I thought. I don't either. I don't even know a single quote from it. I've never bothered to look it up. I hate to say it, I don't care because of the immensity of Lincoln's speech. So Lincoln, the speech is so short, they didn't even get a clear picture of him. He finishes and people don't clap because they don't even know that was it. He only spoke 276 words. And we know back then it took about 10 minutes to take a picture. This is all they managed to get. Seems like he had just finished and he's about to step down, maybe put his hat back on. And this is the whole speech, which I'm not going to read, but just to show you that it fits on one single PowerPoint slide. To me, the most important speech in American history. Ken Burns made a documentary about it a couple of years ago, which is called The Address. It is not 35 hours long. It's only a 2-hour documentary. And he calls this speech the Declaration of Independence version 2.0. This was our reaffirmation of what we would become as a country. Where are we going to be a country that fights this war and wins this war and still allows slavery? Or are we really going to finally go back to what we wrote in 1776, where we said all men are created equal? Are we going to truly mean that and give freedom to everybody, not all white men are created equal? And in his last line, saying a new birth of freedom, this is Abraham Lincoln saying now that it's not worth fighting this war if we are going to allow slavery to exist. We're fighting now to free the slaves. And this is where the war aims of the Union Army will change in just 2.5 minutes, much like the trajectory of the war changed in 48 hours in July. The aims of the war effort are going to change in 2.5 minutes in November. This is now a matter of abolition, a war of abolition, just as it is the restoration of the Union. The election of 1864 is Lincoln and my favorite person in history, George McClellan. New Jersey voted for McClellan. We sure know how to pick them, even as far back in 1864. And then in 1876, we made him governor too. We've always had wonderful choice of governors in our history. It doesn't matter who they are. People always laugh at that, which just shows party or year, doesn't matter. We tend to hate them all. But Lincoln is worried because we are, he's still not quite at that popularity yet. The Gettysburg Address was not the phenomenon it is today. It took a while. It took months, if not years, for the speech to be republished in newspapers and for people to read it and teachers to take it into their classroom. And did they make you memorize it in school? Who here had to memorize the Gettysburg Address? Yeah. By the time I was a kid, we didn't have to memorize it because memorization is evil. So we don't do that to our children anymore, even though I think it personally works, but what do I know? So it takes a while. So Lincoln, it's not like he gave the speech, he walks off, he's a superstar, and everybody loves him again. Most of the country doesn't even know he gave the speech. They don't even know what was said. It takes a while for that to happen. So on the eve of the election results, Lincoln truly doesn't know, am I going to win this election? The Copperhead movement was strong, started to die out after Gettysburg, but McClellan is a very enigmatic person. He's a good speaker. He's always been well-dressed. He's your typical politician. And Lincoln is up all hours of the night, much like he did after battles, waiting for casualty reports, sweating bullets, pacing around all night, not sleeping, hardly a wink, worried that he is going to lose this election. And with that, all that he fought for, all that this country fought for would be lost because McClellan would become president and that would be it. He would just form a truce with the Confederacy and it would have all been for nothing. But in fact, Lincoln didn't have anything to worry about, handedly winning this election, McClellan getting only 2 states. Lincoln will give his second inaugural address on March 4th, 1865. And this is where he offers hope that it's not when the Union will win the war. Excuse me, not if the Union will win, but it is when. They know between their men, their supplies, the Confederacy is now losing battle after battle. They are now in disaster mode. They know they are going to win the war. It's just a matter of time. And much to the dismay of many of his like-minded politicians in his cabinet, Lincoln is going to take an accepting and peaceful attitude towards the South. He doesn't want arrests and executions or Confederate generals hanging from every lamppost in Washington. He says, with malice toward none and charity for all, he wants to assure anybody hearing the speech, anybody that will read it, that once this war is over, we are going to welcome the South back as the brothers that they are. There will have to be, swearing of allegiances and certain protocols, but for the most part, the South will be welcomed back. At this inaugural address, Lincoln is photographed with his assassin. Bet you've never seen this lost photo before. I actually made this on Photoshop. I tell you, when I posted this without comment one day on Facebook years ago. I had people that I never even knew I was friends with on there reaching out. Where did you find that? But no, Lincoln really was photographed with his assassin. As he's giving the speech, there is John Wilkes Booth up in the gallery watching. And Lincoln will say and do something that will set Booth off irreparably. He has the band play a certain song, Dixie, and then makes a comment, something to the effect of, I think this song is now ours again, to which Booth would have heard that and would have went absolutely ballistic. Booth is seeing his way of life come to an end. Like I said, I don't know why he felt so strongly about that, considering he didn't own slaves himself. Booth really personally didn't stand to lose very much, as opposed to other people that were going to lose a lot when the Confederacy would lose this war. But while all this is going on, we have the issue of the 13th Amendment, which is portrayed rather accurately by the Steven Spielberg film from 2012. Northern politicians, mainly of the abolitionist variety, wanted to put the final nail in the South's coffin with the war winding down, saying that, well, the war will not end as quickly unless we pass this amendment. And there was a race, supposedly, to get this amendment passed to finally ban slavery at the federal level, or at least get the amendment in motion. There were people that were arguing in the North, in the Union, well, we should leave it up to the states. Well, isn't that kind of how we got here in the first place? And he has to say, no, this has to be a federal ban. Because what did we fight this war for? Why did all these people die? We're gonna save the Union, and then what? We're gonna still have slavery, and then we're gonna have an issue again down the line. And it's been alleged that Lincoln maybe paid some people off to vote for it. I don't know if that's ever been proven. And again, there's that question: does it matter? If the end result was to get rid of slavery, does it matter if he slipped somebody a 20, or does that make him a tyrant or doing something illegal? The amendment will pass, and while all that is going on, Lincoln is going through something internally. The stress is finally getting to him. Somebody that has presided over the deadliest war in our history, the loss of several children, his wife grieving, him grieving, not truly understanding grief like we do today with PTSD and trauma and such. And you could argue, did Lincoln know he was going to die? Lincoln had gone through many threats throughout his presidency. There had been assassination and kidnapping plots ever since the war began. But Lincoln is having dreams now, which Mary Todd attributes to stress, and also, the war is coming to an end. You're trying to get the amendment passed, and she's seeing symbolism in all of it. But he's just really having plain old premonition dreams where he's walking through the White House and he comes across a coffin, and there's a man in it lying in state, and there's a guard standing by it, and he says, well, who is this? Who is dead in the White House? And the guard responds, it's the president. He was killed by an assassin. Lincoln was very much a believer in fate, saying many times throughout his presidency that if somebody was going to kill him, they were going to kill him. He didn't really believe in upping security, which was pretty much non-existent. The Secret Service was for an entirely different reason, for preventing counterfeit currency and not protecting the president. If you wanted to see the president back then, all you had to do was just walk into the White House and you could meet. So the thought of like today with, somebody walking down the street, the president, there's 500 Secret Service guards, that was not fathomable at the time. The saddest part, probably, aside from the assassination, is on the very last day of Lincoln's life, April 14th, he is finally starting to relax. Robert E. Lee had just surrendered. The war is not officially over, but Lee is who most people cared about. And when Lee surrendered, most people took that as, yes, that's the end of the war for all intents and purposes. So Lee has surrendered. The amendment was passed. There's fireworks and parties and celebrations in Washington. And Lincoln and Mary Todd had a very difficult marriage in the White House. For years, they did not sleep together. There were months where they did not even speak person to person. They would pass notes to a staff, and the staff would give a note, or they would ask a staff, oh, can you check in on my wife, check in on my husband? And finally, they are now starting to rekindle their romance. They're like falling in love all over again. He has just won re-election, and on April 14th, the very afternoon that he would be assassinated, he's taking a carriage ride with Mary Todd, and they're holding hands, and they're talking about what they're going to do when his second term is over, which would be in 4 years. And, Lincoln's saying, well, I want to go to California. I've never been there. I'm president of that state. I've never seen it. I want to go there. Mary Todd, she wants to go on a shopping trip through Europe. And they're just laughing and giggling and probably kissing. And after losing several children and dealing with that and sleeping maybe an hour a night with trying to listen to casualty reports coming in, he can finally relax. And just a few hours later, he is shot, and the next day he is dead. And for me, looking at the human element of all of that, that's the worst part. Again, taking him off the pedestal and looking at him just as a husband and a father. And when you think of the stress, I mean, every president ages. They go in with black hair, they come out with gray hair, whoever they are. And we see Lincoln here in 1860, and then, just 5 years later, seeing the hair is now a bit of a mess. It's grayed. He's got the beard. He's not standing up broad shouldered. He's sitting and slouched. And you could just see the wrinkles on his face from hundreds of thousands of soldiers being killed. Many of those soldiers in the Union he wrote letters to their families after their passing, and children being killed, his wife, going through her grief and trauma. It's all seen here in his face. And that's the tragedy of it, that as soon as he could finally start to get over it, he has that life taken from him. Following Lee's surrender, that is going to be it for John Wilkes Booth and his anger. It's partially revenge, partially trying to re-energize the Confederate Army. He feels, well, the soldiers that just surrendered will see the president of the Union has been assassinated. They were also going to kill Ulysses S. Grant, who was supposed to accompany Lincoln to the theater. That did not happen. Secretary of State William Seward, and also Andrew Johnson. So basically, the top 4 most important people in the Union were all going to be killed on one night. And this would inspire soldiers still fighting in the field to keep going, and perhaps soldiers that just surrendered to maybe join the fight again. They are going to plot in the home of Mary Surratt, where they plotted a lot of the kidnapping, and you could do a whole lecture just on her. Did she know? Did she not? Was she guilty? Should she have been executed? Personally, I don't know if she was, actively plotting, but she was serving them meals while they were all talking about this. It would have been very difficult for her to not know what was going on. And, even today, if you know there's a murder going to be committed and you don't report it, you are held liable for that. Should she have been executed? Maybe that's a different story. But anyway, it is announced Lincoln and Grant would be attending a play on April 14th, which is something they would never do today. You never announce ahead of time where the president's going to be. They just show up, and nobody will know that they're there. The play is going to be Our American Cousin, which is a comedy. Booth knows it very well, and this is going to be important because he is going to time his movements in the theater with moments that the crowd will be laughing or will be so enraptured by what is going on the stage. Booth is an actor in a theater he acted at, so even his presence there is not going to send up any red flags. He was at a place that he knew very well. When Lincoln left for the evening, he said to usually his main bodyguard, Crook, who was not on duty that night, was a different gentleman whose name escapes me, but did not wait outside the box guarding the president, but instead went down to the theater bar to have a drink. And he said, "Goodbye, Crook." And Crook responds, "You mean good night, sir." Crook said years later it was the first time that he neglected to say goodnight to me, and it was the only time that he ever said goodbye. I thought of it at that moment, and a few hours later, when the news flashed over Washington that he had been shot, his last words were so burned into my being that they can never be forgotten. At the theater, Booth will use what you could consider to be the worst possible gun for such a momentous event. Small Derringer, notorious for misfiring, only one shot. So again, the what if scenarios in history. What if he goes to pull the trigger and it didn't go off? Would not have had time to really figure it out. Wouldn't it be like a revolver where you would just keep cocking until you got a bullet? So Booth uses this little Derringer, which he can hide. Mary Todd and Lincoln, they are late to the play, fashionably late, about an hour in. When they arrive, the band begins to play Hail to the Chief. The people on stage are cheering. The audience is cheering. The war Lee had just surrendered. This was a celebration as much as it was a play. Booth will, though, as we know throughout history, enters the box, fires one shot into President Lincoln's head. Major Henry Rathbone will get up and attempt to accost Booth, and Booth will stab him in the shoulder with a dagger. Following the gunshot, though, Booth will announce to the theater, "Sic semper tyrannis," which means thus to tyrants or death to tyrants. a line very similar to something he would have uttered in his many performances of Julius Caesar. He then leaps out of the box onto the stage. His spur will get caught in an awning. He will fall awkwardly and break his ankle. He then stops one more moment, and while waving that dagger, yells, "The South is avenged." He is giving a performance. You'd think you just assassinated the president, you'd want to get the hell out of there as fast as possible, but he takes 2 stops just to reiterate what he had done and his feelings on this. This is something that people are shocked. And to say that, for lack of a better term, just put yourself in the theater. Okay, this is not a Hollywood movie where the camera is choosing to focus on a certain person or a certain angle. You're watching this play. It's loud. There's music. There's laughter. There's clapping. You just hear this little pop. You might not hear it at all. All of a sudden, there's some screaming. There's a commotion up in the box. All of a sudden, this guy just jumped onto the stage. He's waving a knife around, screaming something about the South is avenged, and then he's limping off the stage. And then you're like, wait a second, that was John Wilkes Booth. What exactly is going on here? It takes a few minutes for people to grasp that Lincoln had actually been shot. It's not like the movies where he gets shot and everybody starts screaming and comes to his aid. Up in the box, of course, they know what's going on, but everybody downstairs is trying to figure out the situation. On YouTube, there's actually an interview with a gentleman who was still alive in the 1950s that was at the assassination, I think as a 6 or 7-year-old. And just to hear him tell the story, it's not as dramatic as the movies make it out to be, because it's just, nobody knows what's going on. They're not like looking for it like we would be in a movie. Booth is expecting to be treated as a hero. He's going to invigorate those Confederate soldiers. He knows any place he goes, he'll be given shelter and food, but actually that's going to be the exact opposite. And this manhunt, which will be the largest manhunt in American history until the Boston bombing, with a $100,000 reward, an unheard of amount for Booth. He does not get the reaction that he wants, mainly because there are a lot of Southerners, they don't want anything to do with an assassin, and 2, they were worried at the end of the war that the North is going to punish us. There's going to be arrests and executions, and they were worried. And now all of a sudden, Lincoln has just promised a welcoming attitude. Everything's going to be fine. Malice toward none, charity for all. And now a Southerner has just gone and assassinated the man who promised us that everything was going to be fine. Little did they know they would have Andrew Johnson as president, but they're not quite foreseeing. They're thinking it's going to be terrible for them in the South. So Booth is fleeing, trying to find help, trying to get his ankle fixed, which he will find that aid at the home of Samuel Mudd, which again, the debate rages on. Was it a preordained meeting point? Was Mudd involved? The family has fought for 150 years to get his name cleared. Lincoln will pass away the next morning in a house across the street in a bed that was so small they had to lay him diagonally. Mary Todd was by his side the whole night, screaming, crying, saying things like, "It should have been me." And when they finally, Robert Todd Lincoln finally is able to remove his mother to another room just to get her to relax, and that is when Abraham Lincoln passes away. Stanton famously says, or maybe not exactly said it this way, now he belongs to the ages. Or was it now he belongs to the angels? Which a few years ago there was some articles that came out that said it was actually a misquote, that he actually said now it belongs to the angels, but it was reported as ages, and he said, well, actually that sounds better than what I said, so we're just going to go with that. So you can look up online, you can decide for yourself. Either way, he says his famous quote, and John Wilkes Booth is fleeing like a criminal, not finding help anywhere. I do recommend the book that you brought in, sir, Manhunt. I don't recommend the series. I haven't seen it, but I have some friends that are fellow Civil War buffs, and they have, and that's why I'm not watching it. I don't want to do it to myself just yet. Booth will finally end up at Garrett's farm, and the Union, in pursuing him, they want him alive. as they would with most criminals of that nature. And John Wilkes Booth is going to write in his final journal entry because he doesn't understand why he is not getting support. He doesn't understand why he's being hated. He says, why? For doing what Brutus was honored for, and yet I, for striking down a greater tyrant than they ever knew, am looked upon as a common cutthroat. One last Shakespearean connection for Booth. Was it the Brutus of history? Was it the Brutus of Shakespeare? Either way, that is what is going through his mind. Why won't they help me? I did this country a huge favor, and nobody understands. Booth will, though, be caught up too, and despite orders to take him alive, there is a soldier named Boston Corbett who was a religious fundamentalist who believed God was speaking to him, telling him to kill John Wilkes Booth. He shoots him in the barn, which had been set on fire in order to smoke him out. The bullet does sever Booth's spinal cord. He is dragged out of the barn paralyzed, and he will die the next morning. Booth's last words are useless, useless. And in fact, he wanted to see his hands. That was his last request, and a guard raised his hands to his face, and he utters those two words. As for the other conspirators, 4 of the main 6 would be executed on a brutally hot summer day, presided over by Winfield Scott Hancock, who said of the affair that he had fought a lot of battles and seen a lot of men die, but he never saw anything so terrible as when they hung Mary Surratt. Some close-up images here. Don't want anybody to get sunburned before we hang them, so they have their umbrellas. They have tied Mary Surratt's dress around her legs so it does not fly up. I guess they tied even the men's legs together as well. And through the trap door they went. Not to rush through the aftermath, but we could be here all night. I'm sure some would probably want to be here all night, and some have probably heard just enough of my voice. Anyway, the Lincoln legacy today, probably the most beloved president in history. I mean, you ask people, who's your favorite president? I think probably 70, 80% of them are going to say, oh, Abraham Lincoln. Somebody that, for me, looking at this, trying to remember the human element, which is something I try to remind people of, that these were all real people, not just Lincoln, but some of the other historical topics I do. Just think how different this country could have been if he was not assassinated. What if Lincoln's plans for Reconstruction were realized? Would things have been better? Maybe they wouldn't have. We don't know. But seeing where this country is today, there are direct connections to this one single event. Obviously, the Civil War is still felt by a lot of people. The effects of it throughout Reconstruction, the Civil Rights era, ending where we are today. But more specifically, a lot of that stemming from Abraham Lincoln and his legacy, not just what he did, but also what he did not get a chance to do. And as for Booth's legacy, like I said, he's been kind of written out because a lot of people don't want to take the time to understand him and see him as a person too, because I think that also kind of brings it home to a lot of people that, yeah, anybody can be a murderer. Anybody can do horrible things. We like to paint certain people as heroes and others as monsters, but at the end of the day, we're all human and everybody's capable of doing anything. And so it's not exactly the anniversary. I did want to get here last month, but we remember Lincoln today, tomorrow, and also try to keep in mind the many what-if scenarios of history and how different perhaps this country could have been and how it is different and for the better because of Abraham Lincoln. So thank you all very much for joining me tonight. Hope you enjoyed.
Can you take a couple questions?
Sure.
Buddy?
What exactly was it he was arrested for again in 1862, Booth?
Treasonous remarks.
And where was that? And what were the remarks?
He said, I wish the president and the whole damn government would go to hell. And he said this in St. Louis. Yeah.
Was an opinion I recently read that said something to the effect of, even if the guard had been at the door of Lincoln's booth, that John Wilkes Booth still would have been given entry because he was famous, because he was well known in the theater and the guard, and there was no real sense of protection that same way. And that the guard would have just let him go in.
That's certainly possible. He would have seen Booth as, well, that you're an actor in this theater. You know, Booth could have said, "Oh, I just want to see the president," and they probably would have said, "Oh, sure, come on in." But even if he didn't want to let him in, Booth could have probably just overpowered him and made his way in anyway. So that's certainly possible.
I mean, I was interested to see what your answer was gonna be to that. I actually teach that to my classes. I said, you know, the thing about the guard, the overblown.
Yes.
Because this is a guy that is, you know, it'd be like Brad Pitt or some, whoever.
Yeah.
And he wanted to see the president. Stop him probably, I mean, and especially in those days, because you could, like you said, walk right into the house and knock on the door. Is President Lincoln around? I just want to ask him something.
You would see him on the street. He'd walk in the different government buildings, the telegraph office and stuff like that, and it was no big deal. There he is, you
I
know.
think a lot of the movies show Booth kind of sneaking around the theater on his way up to Lincoln. He wouldn't have had to do that. Just walk right in. Everybody, hi, how are you? You know, nobody would have asked, "Oh, why are you here?"
I would have cheered him, yeah.
I think the contemporary opinion is that Dr. Mudd was part of he was a Southern sympathizer who was part of a railroad for Southern fugitives, but he had absolutely no part or knowledge of the assassination. And it's not like Booth was putting him hands on paper asking for recruits to come into the thing.
Right.
So I don't think anyone prior to the assassination, except those intimate Confederates, knew really what was being planned at all.
Right. And Booth, you know, he wasn't planning on breaking his ankle. So if he didn't, he would have just rode right on past Mudd's house.
What do we know about the capture of Powell? I know he left Seward's house after stabbing him.
Yeah.
How did they track him down so fast?
Walked into back to Mary Surratt's house.
Is that what he did?
He walked in, when she, I think when she was being interrogated by the federal marshals, he came walking in the room.
He wasn't the shiniest.
Something clever than I thought.
He wasn't the brightest bulb on his.
Not a question, but I just want to take contrary opinion to one of the things that you said.
Right.
We were talking about Lincoln's famous letter to Miss Greeley where he says, if I could save the Union by freeing some of the slaves or freeing none of them. I think you have to really look, first off, that was written after Lincoln had already written the Emancipation Proclamation. And I think what he was trying to do was trying to prepare the country for the release of this as a war effort. As he said, you know, what I do, I will do to save the Union.
Right.
And I think in many ways it was a prime, because he was responding to a editorial that Greeley had put in his paper, attacking him for not having a policy. And I think in many respects, he was setting the country up to be primed for this to be released.
Right. I think that you could find that in a lot of his quotes to try to give people just the awareness of it, and especially with the 13th Amendment, trying to get people to say, well, the war is going to end faster if we do this, to try to maybe lessen the blow a little bit.
That's like in the book that you mentioned before about the demons of unrest. There's a little thing in there which I didn't know anything about. That was the original 13th Amendment that would have left slavery untouched.
Right.
It was passed by the House. It was passed by the Senate. It was signed by the president, but it was never voted on by any states. So it's considered a ghost amendment that could still be put into effect if enough states voted for it.
I have to take a picture of that book after just to remember to read that. Interesting. You got good.
Oh, just one comment, nobody, it's still taking a long time, I just presented a book to Mr. Morrison. I know of a man, I'm trying to get him on sourcing, he wrote a book about John Mosby, his companies being up at the Virginia coast, across the Potomac, because there was really possibly, it's becoming an undertone of information, if anybody knows it. Mr. Edward Steers, he's written the signature book that Dr. McPherson endorsed, Blood on the Moon, and the central theme of Blood on the Moon is one of the cornerstone books now on the assassination of Lincoln. It explains the fact that come retribution, the book that came out in 1988, and I had the discussion with Mr. Getz, he wrote about Mosby possibly being an asset to Booth because he probably was a Confederate spy. that all his network, Lewis Powell, what I was trying to bring out, he was a member of Mosby's detachment. And a lot of people don't know that. I just got Betty Owensby's book that Mr. Getz referenced. This book, I put it on, it's called Ever the Great Ghost. 4 companies were up at the coast of Virginia, most likely waiting for Booth. The initial plan was to kidnap him and Seward. And even if they could get at Stanton. Because Powell went in to stab Seward and assassinate him. And the thing was that all got foiled. And Mr. Getz is writing a subsequent book explaining this Confederate Secret Service manifestation. Steers is very much convinced of, as a matter of fact, 2 to 3 people, they all worked in the government, the 3 people. The Surratt Museum has the James Hall Library. What I'm trying to point out is that there's government and there's a credible sourcing. Brigadier General Tidwell served in the CIA and the OSS prior to the CIA, and David Winford Grady, he just passed away. He served in the National Security Agency. They had, I guess, documents to access from their intelligence background that Booth was leaning towards. He was a spy. His carte blanche is part of the crediting. He spent time, and there's another serious book I have in this bag. It's called Montreal City of Secrets. That 1864 plot, he was supposed to kidnap Lincoln back then. He was working in Montreal the last 2 years of his life. And he drew money 5 months before he shot Lincoln at a Montreal bank. Montreal was a secessionist town. That's why Jefferson Davis was with open arms. So there's a lot more going on. Also, the work of John Fazio, who's a lawyer out of the Cleveland area in Ohio. Take a look at a book called, for everybody, Decapitating the Union. This is very, very serious because there's more implications. And when you get into the hidden economics of the war, I'm trying to reach a book. All I can find a reasonably priced book if I don't borrow from interlibrary loan. It's called by David Surdam. He's an economist. And he talks about the hidden economy of the cotton trade. And that Northerners were still bargaining with Canadians, which was still British North America. So it's a lot more going on here. And Mr. Getz, to finish off, forgive me for being long-winded, Mr. Getz is writing, as I told Mr. Kamaris, a sequel. Lewis Powell said to Lafayette Baker's associates, "You don't know half the truth of what this is all about and who's involved." Yeah. So it's a lot more serious. So he's writing a follow-up to Ever the Grey Ghost. I would suggest, again, Montreal City of Secrets, From Retribution, Blood on the Moon would be a really good source, especially Montreal City of Secrets is written by a Canadian who settled in Savannah. There is a monument to the Confederate Secret Service, a funerary stone in that major cemetery in Savannah, and that was part of the path he took to do this research, but it was carved in Montreal, down to Georgia. So there's a little bit more going on here. April of '65 is another good book by the late Brigadier General. So you give the mouthful. It's a lot more of intensive a concept.
Good recommendations.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Wasn't Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation also directed towards the Europeans?
Yeah, they wanted to ensure that because the Confederacy was hoping to get Great Britain to ally itself with them, which Great Britain would not do so long as they had slavery. So for Lincoln to come out with the Emancipation Proclamation kind of more strongly made the Confederacy, at least in Europe's eyes, waging a war to perpetuate slavery, which would, in partially his hope to keep Great Britain from allying itself. And there is a book about that. I don't know if anybody's read it. I can't remember. It's a book about the Confederacy in Great Britain.
Oh, well, there's Amanda Foreman, World on Fire.
That might be it. Yeah, because it was a Confederate flag on fire with Great Britain's map.
There's also a book similar to that. It's about this British operative that was around Charleston. So it could be, it's either A World on Fire by Amanda Foreman or the other book about the British operative that was for them because they emancipated their slaves earlier.
I think it was A World on Fire. I believe
By
that was
Amanda
the book.
Foreman.
It's been a long time.
That's okay.
There's another book that I have at home. It's an older book, but it deals specifically with the Confederacy and its dealings with other countries, international relationships of the Confederacy. I can't remember the title.
I think I've seen that on Amazon. It's almost going to buy it. It was like their diplomacy policies and
Right.
such. Like people downplay even the French being involved. but this was basically the war dealing with slavery. Some of it I got it from Dr. Richard Schreiner, Path to Greatness. But a lot of people downplay when, and the thing is, I even just showed Mr. Kamara, about you had those quotes about, there was a problem with abolition. There's another book, now Dr. Oakes, he's supposed to be an expert on slavery politics, maybe just in some other PhD. This talks about that abolition was intertwined in the political landscape. And not to take away, I mean, I think he was playing the fence because he just didn't want to have the war get worse, which it was going to inevitably get worse anyway.
Right.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, again, thanks, Greg. Favor and just move over here so we get a picture of you in front of the Lincoln thing there.
Put his picture back up. Stand next to Booth or Lincoln?
Jerry,
I'll stand by this one.
Jerry, you prefer.
Just don't know. That was on my dresser. I think my wife cashed it today.
Good, good. I need to thank you. Thank you very much.
Very, very good.
This one on the side wall.
No, that's yours. It's a Jersey Shore Civil War.
Oh, great.
On Amazon.
This is your.
Text me.
Oh, it's
Get that
excellent.
on social media.
I will indeed. I will.
Let me write
It just has
it's not on my card.
It has a seamless style. It just flows.
Actually, you don't even have to write it down here. Just give it to me and I'll.
7007.
And you can put my number in as well, so you have it in case you have to contact me.
Five tickets.
Yeah. He moved in in March.
I just called you
You
again.
have one closet. Oh, and then little shelf.
And,
Actually, it was two.
create a new contact.
South Carolina.
Yeah, most people buy.
Where'd you go?
Do we post names on it?
Yes, you do.
Okay, so, okay, so you did.
CAGGIANO.
And you said my name right too.
Okay.
Heard my name.
Oh, I bet.
But I don't even care.
No, just don't call me late for dinner, right?
Yeah.
That's what I always say.
Those you're gonna write.
My nickname was Kim. My first name is Constantine.
Okay.
And, people said, oh, you Constantine,
Yeah, yes, you are.
Kim, whatever you want. I said, okay, just don't call me late for dinner. You know.
And Kim becomes.
Good question. Everybody asks me that and I don't have an answer and I ask. my parents, They didn't have an answer for me other than.
Connie, it could have been.
Yeah, it could have been, yeah, the shortened version.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Because we pronounce.
Phone number, if you don't need your address.
No, that would be my grandpa called me Dino, actually. Much to my mother's chagrin. My mother wasn't Greek.
Oh, gee, it's Dean Martin, you know?
Swedish, yeah. Swedish and English. So I'm a true mark. I'm gonna put Lincoln historian. How's that?
That was almost like make.
I know you're,
Right.
I know you're, you got a lot of titles, but. And,
Another Civil War round.
be looking for Debbie. I'm sure she's.
But I learned it.
By John Fazio, he's a lawyer. What happened is some of these things are kind of sensitive. He wrote a major league book for.
I've heard of it. I haven't.
Yeah, very seriously, nobody's perfect, him, anybody. I don't agree with his stance about being involved.
You know, there wasn't, just by the ships that they built for the.
Well, he's got James Dunwoody Bullock brokered. you know, I mean.
At the beginning, it was because.
The Shenandoah and the Alabama were out of that deal, you know? And, Thomas Haynes Dudley, who's from this state, he was the counter. Some way he could not have stopped that deal. They were dirty steamers. For her, he was a businessman, he became a historical writer.
Incognito, so you can just close it and I didn't have to
Okay.
He tripled our union commerce.
I think a lot of people forget that they, after the Civil War, the United States basically tried suing
Crown.
were crowned for the ships because of the damage and they did settle.
Yeah, well, they did. You know, here's the bizarre thing. Settled secession in the legislative branch. There was just too much filibustering. And that's where the Knights of the Golden Circle, that's another member of that stuff.
Yeah.
Really good book. It's just a backdoor view. Knights operated their